Hi everyone, Carter Krishnaiyer here for Beyond the 90. I wanted to quickly clarify for everyone the correlation between the USL Premier, the newly announced or newly labeled Division One league, which I think we knew this was going to be the name. They had taken out the trademark some time ago, and USL is very reluctant to move itself away from very anglicized naming conventions, right? They want to copy the names of leagues in the UK, in England, not only on the men's side, but they've done it with the Super League on the women's side. So that's the way they think. So it was obviously going to be USL Premier. Whether those names correlate well in the American market to an American marketplace and American consumers, that can be debated. I have my thoughts on that. But that's not what this conversation today is going to be about. I wanted to address the confusion I may have created this morning, the news stories that have been written about, and USL doesn't get a whole lot of news coverage. So they have employed a pretty good PR agency, which has gotten people to kind of repeat what is in the press release. But there isn't that much coverage of USL and the USL Championship and now this USL Premier out there. So as one of the few publications that closely covers the USL structure, I had a piece this morning. My colleague Alex Ashton had a piece this morning. His piece was on how it affects the USL League One structure. I would encourage everybody to read that. I also, in my piece, talked about how it affects the CBA negotiations. And based on a lot of your private messages to me, that created a lot of confusion. So let me backtrack about a year, because we knew the CBA was expiring at the end of the 2025 USL Championship season, or on December 31st, 2025. And what happened was, by announcing the Division One league and promotion relegation structure, kind of randomly, the way the USL HQ did, they dropped a bomb, literally a bomb in a conference room. If you are the USL Players Association, if you are the USLPA, how do you negotiate an agreement for 5 years or 7 years for the championship exclusively if it's going to be linked to other leagues? And that bomb went off. It was detonated. And basically, my understanding, we haven't talked about a lot about this. You know, there's a lot of information because we're very judicious at Beyond the 90 about what we know. We don't just, I'm not trying to take shots at anyone in particular, but there are people who just like to spout off how much they know is going on behind the scenes, and they throw it on social media or in a blog post. We don't do that. I will tell you the single biggest obstacle to getting that CBA done on time, and why we are at the stage we're at in late January of 2026, is because of the Division One and Pro Rel announcements in 2025. It was dropping a bomb in the room. It took negotiations, which were progressing on a normal pace in February and March of last season, to a halt. What are you talking about with Division One? What will Division One look like? How will it affect minimum compensation? What kind of markets are you going to be in? What if we negotiate a bad deal for championship players and those teams get promoted? What if we negotiate a deal for championship players based on the premises you've laid out, and then those teams apply to join Division One? And if you're going to form a Division One league, the players have to have some input. The labor for that league has to have some input. So all of this stuff, stalled negotiations. Haven't really talked about that to this point, but I've kind of held it under, held some of my cards close, or some of the things I know close to the vest. That's something I've known about for months. That was a big problem. So now, with negotiations set to resume tomorrow, by the way, as we talk on Tuesday, January 27th, between the union and USL HQ, USL puts out this announcement on Tuesday. I think that's a sign that there's some progress with the players' union. And I'll tell you why. Because I think the Players Union, we've talked about licensing, we've talked about minimum compensation, we've talked about healthcare, we've talked about travel, we've talked about all of those issues. We've talked about structure in the championship and all of the places where the players are in a different place than management. And where in some cases, some clubs are in a different place than league management. But ultimately, no deal was going to get done if the parameters for Division One, or now the USL Premier, I need to start referring to it as that, were not laid out. They've been laid out kind of in these broad brushes publicly now, as of this morning. And privately, I think the Players Union knows more about what markets USL is looking at, what clubs could potentially be part of USL Premier, what the compensation structure will look like, what the sponsorship deck might look like, the potential sponsorship deck, so we know some of the valuations, and then knowing that we have 2 more years on a CBA in USL League One, you can fix sort of in kind of an incremental way your compensation for USL League, for USL Championship, and then USL Division or USL Premier. And the union can go from a position of strength or a position of knowledge, which also means to me, while we've talked about the potential of a work stoppage before the regular season, I think that becomes a little less likely with this announcement, because I think basically what this does is maybe the Players Union will continue to negotiate even as the season begins, because they now know what the parameters are for USL Premier. I'm not guaranteeing that. I'm just saying a work stoppage, which I still think is a distinct possibility, may be less likely now. I'm not saying it was likely to begin with, but I'm not saying it was unlikely either. The percentage was somewhere in the middle. It was in the middle bracket as to whether it was going to happen or not as of, let's say, late last week. So that's pretty important as we go forward. And I think something else that this might create is an opportunity within the USL structure, within the club structure. We know there are differences of opinion from club to club about this CBA. And I've even now heard from big clubs, I wrote that piece a week ago about big clubs and why they would be, it's best that they get a new CBA over the line. I've now gotten some pushback from some big clubs that say, hey, we'd be giving up our advantages in the marketplace to attract players if somehow Team X offers the same healthcare package as we do. Team X offers the same compensation packages as we do. Team X has the same sort of universal level of training facility, high level of training facility, training complex, all of those stuff that we do. So, unlike the typical American franchise league where there's where there's an attempt to seek competitive balance, within USL, some of the bigger clubs are saying we have a built-in advantage because the league is so unequal. Why would we want to change that? I was not expecting that reaction, quite frankly. I understand it. Once it's pointed out to me, I understand it. I get it. I just was not expecting that, because my take had been, look, if y'all want to be operating at this uber professional level, there are some clubs in USL that operate like uber professional clubs, just at as high a level as most MLS clubs. Now, admittedly, that's on one hand, the number of USL clubs that operate like MLS clubs. But if you're one of those clubs, wouldn't you want the standards raised? I think yes, from a business standpoint. But there are people saying in those clubs to me, you know what, we have a competitive advantage. This is why we win every year and they lose. So that's another thing that has come up in the last week that I did not expect. But so I just wanted to explain, I think this gives the players some clarity as they negotiate the new CBA at the championship level. They will understand where USL Premier likely comes in, what the minimum compensations for that league. I'm sure it's being discussed behind closed doors. Now, what the minimum compensation and healthcare and market profile will look like for that a league in 2028, assuming it starts in 2028. I still think that that's an unrealistic start date, but USL keeps saying 2028, so we'll keep saying 2028 with an asterisk, of course, with a caveat. But yeah, that's where we are. I think this helps move negotiations forward, and I hope I've made sense now in explaining why I believe that.